Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to episode 155 of Overdose and Chill, podcast video live stream where we bring you some internalized experiential stories from leaders working in the digital retail space. We are live across LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're watching us. If you've got anything you'd like to share, questions, comments, please just drop them in the comments of whichever channel you're watching us on. They come into our little back room. Raven and Holly are existing behind the scenes and will push your questions up to us. So today, really excited to have Scott McNab join us from RealNZ. We're going to find out all about digital in the tourism industry, seasonality, connection with consumers, international tourism, local tourism, what you do on the slope, before the slope, all those kind of things. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you give everyone a little introduction to yourself? The floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So Scott McNab, about me, so my personal purpose is to create a better world for future adventurers through the power of business. And why I start with that is because I'm very lucky in the role I'm in now and the role I was in previously with Icebreaker were both businesses that were very heavily purpose-driven and had a long, authentic history of being purpose-driven. And I think that's largely why I ended up there and largely why I ended up staying with Icebreaker as long as I did. And so it's really important to me to be working for a business that does a lot more than just make money. And when I look at the time I've spent in both those businesses, I've learned a lot and grown a lot and love being able to contribute on a bigger scale. So, yeah.
So for those of you that are not Kiwis listening in, Icebreaker is one of those institutionalized businesses into kind of the Kiwi apparel and retail vernacular. It's our version of North Face. Is that kind of a fair statement, Scott? Am I paraphrasing?
Yes, it's funny you say that, Todd. It's actually owned by the same company that owns the North Face now.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah. So, but Icebreaker is a leader in the merino category, very focused on producing natural quality garments and has a long history of innovating in that space.
So tell us a little bit about RealNZ and what markets you're operating in, because I think a lot of people tend to paraphrase that, oh, aren't those the guys that run a couple of ski slopes? But it's so much more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So RealNZ is kind of like, I would say, a tourism business. Conservation is a big focus of who we are as well. We sometimes say we're a conservation business enabled by tourism. Right. But as far as what we do, I guess, we run a couple of ski fields in Cardrona and Treblecombe. They're much newer to the business than some of the other aspects, but we actually have tourism operations in Queenstown, Fiordland, Stewart Island and Christchurch, so lower South Island of New Zealand. Experiences that are focused on immersing people deeply in nature, so day cruises and overnight cruises in Milford Sound and Doubtful Sound, those types of experiences.
And you've been there pre-COVID, I understand, as well?
Not quite pre-COVID. So my timeline's an interesting one. I actually joined the industry during COVID. I had no experience in the tourism industry. And I thought the best time to join any industry was when it was at its bottom. The classic only way is up from here. I was probably about 6 months early on that, unfortunately. And so I joined just as we went into another big lockdown. And my first job with the business was all around a new set of COVID comms for our guests and partners. But since then, it's been full steam ahead as we try and rebuild coming out of COVID and reimagine what the business can look like.
So I imagine through that COVID period, as a business that relies on tourism, be it international or local, the challenges must have been coming daily, if not hourly, into your inbox.
Yeah, it was immense for lots of different reasons. So our tourism side of the business is about 70% international.
Okay.
And it was turned off straight away.
Yeah.
And so when you've got a business where a lot of it is designed for scale of international guests and they don't come straight away, you've got too many assets and too much cost that you need to look at, and it doesn't scale down quickly as an industry or a business. And so a lot of challenges around just making it through COVID for us.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that meant a lot of looking at where all our costs were and trying to figure out how to survive. And it really was a case of doing whatever we could to survive that period. And especially without knowing when we were going to come out of it and when we'd start to see some of that volume back. A very, very challenging time for this business as it was for many in tourism and broader.
So let me ask you a slightly loaded question then. With a business and clearly a team of mentality of where you've spoken about conservationalism, purpose-driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you find that ratcheted balance between commercial reality when the shit hits the fan? Because I think it's all well and good to be very purpose-driven, very philanthropic when times are good. It becomes very difficult when you're then having to protect your shareholders and protect your staff and to survive. So how does that morality balance within sort of like the ownership structure and what you're employed to do through the business?
Yeah, cool. What I'll do is I'll answer the question at that high level and then come back to what it meant during COVID, because I think quite often, especially for people who are new to the business, we get the question around, but how and when do you make that choice between profit versus purpose? And the reality is they shouldn't be one or the other if you're making the right choices. And so there's a lot of choices that we can make that actually deliver more from a profitability perspective that are actually very much aligned with our purpose.
Right.
And what that enables us to do is actually really lean into our purpose more, and that drives future profit. And then that profit enables us to invest and lean more into our purpose. And there's a number of other brands that you can look to that have done that really well. I think Patagonia is the one that's held up most often, the clothing brand, where they have really focused on making what seem initially some quite big choices that could basically impact profit in a meaningful way. But the reality is what we've seen is that they continue to grow faster than the category. And they've done that through making some of those big choices. So for us, it's just a case of making sure we're looking through it with both lenses. And the interesting thing, I'll give you an example. Like we can choose to cruise our vessels or boats slower. That saves fuel, but that actually saves money. So the less fuel we use, obviously, it improves our profit on that cruise. So there's all these types of choices that you don't naturally think about when you're thinking about purpose and how it connects to profit. During COVID, that all got way harder because it's at such a level of how do we make it through this period that doesn't have an end date. And I think that's the part that makes it all the harder from a business planning perspective, is when you've got something like that where there's no finish line in sight and it's kind of off and on again. Planning to try and get to a point is impossible. And so that's not to say we didn't keep purpose front of mind, and there was still a lot of work that would continue to be done in that place, but it just gets way, way harder to make that choice because you are literally thinking about how we're going to keep the business going to be able to pay staff and continue to operate.
So I recall catching up, in fact, on this podcast a couple of years ago with the founders of Bellroy, and we spoke for a long time about B Corps, right, with a very similar tonality around that conversation. What's your take on B Corps? Do you think the gloss has come off, or that it was a marketing device rather than a purpose device? Because I found that we started entering a bit of a grey area where it became virtue signaling rather than actual truly defined purpose behind the business.
Yeah, that's a meaty question, Todd.
I don't know the answer to it. And I think my personal perception changes when I look at some businesses and they go, we're now a B Corp. And you look at them and go, really? okay, why have you done that? Right? Was this were you greenwashing your brand? Or you then look at those that have been foundational in that space where, again, like the guys at Bellroy, they live and breathe that every day, right? This is fundamental to their business. And they didn't work to get B Corp. It almost came to them because they'd already had those principles within their organization.
Yeah. I'll give you my take. So I believe B Corp's super important for both the reasons you've kind of talked about. So one of the powerful things for B Corp is it does give people who haven't got that history and authenticity in that space an understanding of what they should be looking at and considering, and a pathway to almost follow within that.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking from experience, a lot of businesses will look at B Corp and understand that they're not where they need to be to get it, and plan out over the next 2 to 3 years what needs to happen to get there. And so just by having B Corp becoming more known and more understood from a guest or consumer perspective means that you've got these businesses who are trying to do better, who now have a bit more of a pathway and understanding of what that looks like. So from that perspective, whether they're doing it because it matters for their customers or not, I don't really mind, because what it's doing is it's helping them be better. And at the end of the day, that's what we actually want, right? And I think for the other side, the Bellroy type, you've got this interesting piece where now they've got something that is becoming more broadly understood, whether from a guest perspective. So they might have been doing all this good stuff. It's really hard sometimes to wrap a bow around that for how you demonstrate that to your customers quickly. And what B Corp allows is that. And so they can actually signal that. And then it gives them a pathway too for continual improvement, because they'll know like what areas they need to work on within that B Corp framework, and they'll be able to identify what they want to focus on over the coming years as well. So I'm a big fan of it. And I think whether it's for either of those reasons that businesses are getting involved, it's great for us as consumers and great for the overall world.
Yeah, I guess you're right. We need to disassociate ourselves away from the why and just look at the what is the outcome. And regardless of the intent, the net outcome is positive for that whole community. So last thing about purpose, because I love talking about purpose. I would assume that you view that purpose of RealNZ, well, clearly it's a reason why you chose to join them, and it sits deep within your personal ethics. And I assume that would be viewed as a brand differentiator when you look at your competitors that are running other activities, right? Do you believe that your customers respect and appreciate and almost seek out that position as well?
Yeah, great question. Not yet.
Right.
So I guess RealNZ, our purpose is to help the world fall in love with conservation, and really what that's about is we're helping, so we're guiding and introducing people in these places to experiences that help change their perspective. Mm-hmm. And we want them to fall in love with what they experience, because people protect what they love. Mm-hmm. I think that's the Jacques Cousteau quote that lots of people use, but it's absolutely true. And then conservation for us is about not just the traditional pieces people think about, but there's flora and fauna and then cultural heritage, whether that's Te Ao Maori or built heritage like the Ursula, which we operate in Queenstown. And then we have our sustainability aspects, which is kind of that climate waste pillar as well. And so that's our purpose. And we have, like I said earlier, international guests from all around the world. If we do better as a business, it doesn't have that much impact on a global scale. But if we actually give people an experience that changes the way they think about doing better, that makes and could make a fantastic and really true difference when we think about our guests coming from countries like China, America, India, and those are some of our big focus countries for the future. So I think that's for us the importance of it.
And when I hear that from you, what you're really doing is you're putting brand New Zealand out there as well, right? This is, when you've got an American that comes over and we see this vernacular of it's so clean, it's so green, it's so fresh, that they see that as a living, breathing emphasis. And I genuinely believe, as a founder of a Kiwi business as well, is that brand New Zealand has never been stronger on a global stage. And it's those small gestures, whilst they might feel tokenistic's the wrong word because it's not tokenistic, but not grand in scale as you're applying, the actual halo effect, I think actually affects every Kiwi business that's trying to have an international scope.
Yeah, we one of the things we've been measuring for 18 months now is how likely are people to contribute to conservation post doing one of our experiences.
Interesting.
And we started that because we're trying to work out, well, how do we measure whether our purposes, that we're succeeding against our purpose? Mm-hmm. And that was one of the ways we decided to do that. And it's really interesting that we can see that people are saying that they are at a much higher rate than we would have expected.
Is that because you're lacing education into your guided events as well?
That's a big part of it. So we have different personas within our guest demographic, obviously, but we have some who are looking to be educated, and they choose to come to New Zealand and specifically, say, Fiordland to see specific bird life because that's what they love and that's what they're about, and they want to understand more about that. But equally, we have what we call experience collectors, and those are people who actually, they want to come to Milford Sound and tick the box because it's one of the eighth wonder of the world, and they know it's going to be amazing, so they have to go. For them, what we do is we give them opportunities to be educated, and it actually deepens their experience with us, but it also gives them a level of information that they might not have had before for them to be able to change their perspective or think differently. And our ambition is that transcends just the time they're with us and carries on further afield.
And so clearly you're pioneering these values, but do those values transcend across the whole industry? Or are there rogue operators who are trying to sell the same tour for half the price and just monetize whatever they can see in front of them?
Yeah, I think I would say tourism, because being reasonably new, I would say tourism slightly ahead of apparel in that space. And that the leaders are very, very focused on it. And I think that's the same in both industries. And then there's a kind of middle cohort, I would say, that are sort of not waiting to see where it goes. They know where it's going, but they don't want to be at the front of it, but they know that they need to keep improving. And then I think in both industries, there's brands that just don't seem to care as much as others. But that's much lesser degree in tourism. And I think it's because ultimately the reason a lot of people get into tourism as operators, and a lot of tourism businesses are very small. And I think it's 78% of tourism operators in New Zealand have less than 11 staff. And so because of that, they've got into it because they're incredibly passionate about their place and what they do. And they've typically come through a guiding pathway, or quite often. So they're passionate about giving people this experience of something they really love, and that's why they do it. And so I think because of that, there's a much higher level of adoption around doing better. And we're far from perfect. We've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of pieces. We've got a coal-fired steamship, right, that's burning a lot of coal every day. And so it's about understanding that and continue to make better choices. And as an industry, I would say we're heavily focused on that in New Zealand.
So when you've got those small, passionate, independent retailers, you have an obligation. You've got the job title of a chief revenue officer, right? And so you have an obligation to be commercially successful, very similar to Patagonia. They can't do good if they're not successful, right? So exactly. There has to be a commercial lens here. Does that get you into any sticky situations of kind of friend and foe with those independent operators, of where they feel you're kind of impinging on their turf because you see a commercial opportunity in this crazy new adventure sport that they've probably invented, and there's probably a new version of something that comes out in Queenstown once a year?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a healthy degree of competition within the industry, and there's absolutely a desire for us to, I guess, win market share, and those other operators want to win market share as well to be successful. What I would say, though, and coming back to your brand New Zealand comment, one of the things that I really love about the tourism industry is a lot of these operators band together to sell New Zealand to the world. And so we've had sales teams up in the US and into Asia, and they're traveling with other operators who are competing with us for sometimes those same guests in, say, Milford Sound or in Queenstown. But what we do in those environments is we're working together to really sell Queenstown or sell New Zealand as a whole. And that, I think, is pretty special. You don't see that in lots of other industries, I don't think.
Well, a rising tide lifts all ships, right?
That's the theory.
Yep. And as a little old Aotearoa in the bottom left-hand corner of the world, we all need to kind of band together to back each other in, right?
Yep. Yeah. And some of the questions we get on those, like, I think it's easy to assume people in America know about New Zealand or have a decent understanding. And we had one on this trip that's just recently happened. Our sales manager came back and she had a conversation with an agent. This was in Chicago. And the first thing he says at the start of the meeting is, I only know one thing about New Zealand, and that's that you all have kangaroos down there.
Wow.
And she just sort of stopped and went, well, I don't know how to break this to you, but you actually know nothing about New Zealand now.
Yeah, you actually know zero. Let me change the slide deck I was about to show you. We're going to go back to basics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. And I guess one of the other challenges there of being a very purpose-led and very vocal business, and one of the things you've said, which really warms my heart, is the calling out where you have work to do in your own business as well, right? That there is, this is a journey, not a destination, right? And I think one of the challenges I've certainly seen, particularly in the retail and even more aggressively in the apparel space, is when you become a purpose-led business, you have put your head above the parapet to be absolutely shot, right? And you have to live those standards 100 days out of 100. And the one day that you don't live that standard, there is someone in the media, usually, or someone commenting on Facebook that is ready to take your head off at any one moment, right? And I feel that, I don't know, in New Zealand, we call it tall poppies, right? But I often feel that when you lead with such emotive ambition, there seems to be this weird desire for people to call out the 1% of when you got it wrong as opposed to the 99% of how you got it right. Now, I wish that I won't even ask you to tell me the answer of how we change that culture, because I don't think you or I know that answer. But for me, it just comes down to the resilience of those brands to look inwardly and deflect a lot of that noise. Is that fair?
Yeah. I've thought a lot about this, because this was we talk about this a lot at Icebreaker. And it was a really big concern. And I think the term they put against it is green shaming.
Green shaming, yes.
Yeah.
I actually recall when I think it was like an Australian church group or something did this weird report, and Icebreaker decided not to be part of that report. So they were given a fail. And all the media wanted to talk about was who failed. And it's like, we didn't even enter.
That's yes, that was during my time at Icebreaker, the Baptist survey, and that's exactly what happened. Because we didn't provide a whole lot of information, then we just had a no score against those parts of it. And so I can't remember whether it was an E or an F, but that's where we sat. Now,
but that became the headline, right? That became the headline.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Our brand definitely showed up as the lead brand, and especially because we had been for so long positioned as this really great green focused brand, trying to do better. And I actually look at it, and my perspective's changed over time. Maybe I'm getting older, but I remember when that happened and I was really angry because something I loved and had worked with and for so long had been kind of all of a sudden hauled through the coals, if you like. And now when I look back at it, it was almost like it was one of the best things that could have happened, because what it did is it forced us to actually put together our transparency report for next year, which hadn't really been on the radar at that stage. And so it wasn't about the fact that we weren't doing lots of great stuff, but we just weren't bringing it all together in one place so that we could understand and make even better choices about where we could move the business forward. And so what it did is it forced us to do that so that we had that for next year, and we launched it the following year. And what we found as part of doing that process is we learned a lot right across the business about ourselves, and then it was there for anyone in the business and externally to see, which gave us some really good ability to go, well, actually there's some more opportunity for us to do a better job here, and we can make this choice. And the reality is not that many people actually read it. We could see how many people opened it on our website, and it wasn't as many as we would have liked. But the main thing was, and the benefit was, that we'd actually built that, had all that information, and then could start making better informed choices. So where I used to get really up in arms or almost angry at that kind of tall poppy syndrome or green shaming, now I actually think it does a lot for driving people who do deeply care to even do better than what they might have done otherwise. And so it's tough, and I know a lot of people in apparel or businesses in general take it super personally. Yeah. And I know there will be a lot of founders and owners and CEOs and CMOs who end up in tears because of a comment on Facebook. But that, I think, for lots of those people, because they care so deeply, it drives them to be better. And I think that's really positive too.
I've had it personally myself, Scott. I came up with the name Overdose for a brand, and it means so much to me personally, and the story and the vernacular and the attitude and what it means to our culture and our people and how we wrap around that word. But it's often attacked because people take it completely out of context. And I used to get brutally offended and would be in a foul mood for weeks. And I was trigger responding to people as well. Whereas now I look back on it and saying, do you know what? What it actually did is it led us to actually really clearly document our vision and values, right? And communicate with the team and express those back out to the world. So I resonate and feel exactly what you just communicated.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good.
Okay, so for those listening in, we're going to pivot in a second and talk a little bit more about digital, talk a little bit more about the commercial aspects of growing business. If you've got Q&A, drop it in your social media or channel comments, and we will address those. So let's flip and talk a little bit about digital. You talked about doing trade shows and going out to the US. Otherwise, how the bloody hell do you find customers that want to come and do work or experience what RealNZ has to offer?
Yeah, totally. It's really, really interesting how that's evolving. I would say that tourism in general has still isn't super savvy in that digital space. Tourism New Zealand, at the kind of national body that advocates, is absolutely. But I think if you go back to what I was talking about before, where a lot of the businesses in tourism are small operators who have quite often not come from a marketing and definitely not a digital marketing background, like for a lot, that's what they know because that's what they've grown up with in the industry. And I think that's where COVID's helping a lot to drive a real shift to people thinking about what they should be doing in a digital sense or could be doing, and the fact that it's not as confusing and challenging as what they perceive it is because they don't know. It's kind of like that black dark art for a lot of them. For us, we're fortunate that we have a big enough team that we can actually invest in some good digital expertise internally, and have been able to advance in the last couple of years our digital tech stack quite a bit from where we had been previously, so that we can start to understand a lot more about our guests and also how to target them and attract them. But what I would say,
just on that point then, Scott, so are you saying that the business has moved, and maybe this is a COVID thing as well, the business has moved away from a complete reliance on wholesale, big tour bookings, working through third parties, and now you're genuinely investing in having a relationship with your customer?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've moved away, and I think this is really important. And we could talk about overall business strategy and the D2C versus wholesale choice on that. But for us, it's about understanding our guests and how they want to interact with us, and how we think they're going to find our brand. And so for different markets and different guests, we look at attracting them through different channels. But the part that you said about wanting to grow digital and grow that relationship with our guests is absolutely true. The reality is that a lot of our wholesale partners, they are incredible operators who provide an amazing experience. And so if we come back to our purpose, we want them to still actually bring those guests through. And they deliver something more than we can in a lot of cases, because they're part of a tour series where they're going and doing a number of experiences on their trip around New Zealand and things like that. So it's not about shifting, it's about understanding how we look at those different channels and the role they can play, and I guess growing the overall pie. But that deepening of the relationship with the guests is very important to us, and how we can use that to create better experiences, and obviously learn how to communicate and interact with the guests pre and post experience more as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the, when we were first having our chats talking about RealNZ, and the thing that I still probably scratch my head around is the seasonality of your business, and the fact that you're offering changes across seasons, but is in the same location. And then I sit here thinking, just before we came on air, we were talking, right, we're currently in the shoulder season. We're just kind of moving from bike towards ski. It's just kind of that weird limbo land at the moment. And it's like, well, what content should we be pushing? Because I might be researching my mountain biking holiday for November, but you're currently trying to sell ski passes for the April, May, June onwards season. So how do you find that balance of content, and do you mix that across different channels and different what's on the web versus Instagram stories versus what's on TikTok? How do you mentally juggle?
So it's less of an issue for the broader tourism business, but for our mountain ski business, where we operate a summer business as well. So just for, I guess, people listening, we have our ski business, which is quite traditional ski, a few other aspects to it, but it's 90% classic ski resort. And then we have our summer business, which is made up of mountain biking and karting. And we haven't, I would say, figured out how to do both really well. It's way harder than I expected to solve that challenge. And what we do understand and know is that the winter aspect is why most of our guests want to interact with us. And so we tend to lean into that a lot more. But then if we have very bike-specific focused guests or customers, we tend to look at a way that we can create engagement opportunities with them that sit outside some of those core channels. And so we do have a bike park Instagram account, for example, because that's where we can put that content without going too heavy on it on our main Cadrona account. And so at different levels and on different platforms, we're kind of shifting the tactics slightly. The website is probably the hardest one, if I'm honest, because if we look at February, it's 30 degrees Celsius outside. It's the perfect time of year to come up the mountain and go mountain biking or karting. Yet it's actually one of the biggest sales periods for season passes and early bird multi-day passes for the winter that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're actually sending the most volume of guests for both seasons to the website at the same time.
Yeah.
And there's obviously lots you can do, and the better you understand your guests and where they're coming from and all those things, the better you can do that. But it's not easy. It's definitely one of our biggest challenges, I think.
So you touched on Instagram there, and obviously you're going to have a whole mix of emotive, experiential content as well as educative content, and then there's a booking flow. So it's a quite a diverse marketing channel through there. For our listeners, how do you mix up your channels when you're trying to connect with international tourists? Because China to the UK, to the Germany, to the US, to Australia, to local Kiwis, are you having to generate 15 versions of content across 20 different channels? How on earth do you manage that?
Yeah, I think like any business, there's always choices that need to be made based on the amount of resource you've got. We have looked a lot at what content needs to be created, and ultimately where we've landed at the moment is we're creating what is right for a representation of the overall brand, and then tweaking that last, call it 5 or 10% based on where we're showing up. And the reason we're doing it that way is because, unfortunately, where quite often a lot of businesses have, if they're an international business, they'll be really predominantly one market. Like it might be that they're 70% US and then 20 Australia and 10 New Zealand. We're actually really evenly split around China, US, Europe, and so it gets that little bit harder. But we've specifically chosen not to go down that route like a lot of brands do, where you create a channel as such or create accounts on Instagram and Facebook, etc., that are localized to that market. And I think if you look at lots of different brands out there, you can see they're still grappling with how that works. Like the North Face is a really good example of that, where they've done that, but then they also have their different product categories that they've also created accounts for, and you need a big structure or good tools to be able to execute that well without it feeling a little bit fake. And usually it's a mix of the global content with a little bit of localized content fed in amongst it.
So when you're going out to a market like China, where it's different language, different tonality, different culture, different value set, different budgets, whatever it may be, is that where you rely on your wholesale partners to really connect with that ecosystem rather than having your whole slew of WeChat channels?
Yeah, exactly. So some channels are easier some countries are easier for us to adapt for, and some are much harder. In China, the ecosystem there is very different to what we'd call our Western markets. And so we rely a lot more heavily on that. But equally, as far as how we structure internally, like we have a specific Eastern team that have deep expertise in that space.
Okay.
And so what that enables us to do is get a long way towards what we need to show up to be successful in that market, and then equally lean into key partners in order to execute well. At the same time, there's still that challenge around what they would like us to have versus what we can realistically prioritise in any given year. Yeah.
Alrighty, so you've hit me with emotive content. You've got me interested. I've come to the website. I've had some email automation. You've dropped some remarketing on me. I've booked my first ski pass with you. What happens then in that relationship And how do you take this from a Cardrona ski relationship into a all of RealNZ relationship? How do you really monetize that whole depth of the customer opportunity?
Yeah, at the moment, so I guess once you're committed and you're coming to the mountain, I think what we've focused on historically as a brand is giving you an amazing experience when you're on the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
What hasn't been enough of a focus area is that pre and post part of the experience, which actually makes a big difference. Like if you've never been to a mountain before and you've booked, like there is a series of education pieces that we send to help people understand what to expect when they're coming to the mountain, and some tips for on the mountain, some of those sorts of things to make their on mountain experience better. But
I was that guy. I was that guy, by the way, Scott. I was the guy that was convinced that we don't need snow chains. We don't need snow chains. For my first time ever driving up a mountain, straight onto the AA, halfway up the hill. Yeah, I was that guy.
Yeah, it happens a lot. And so there's a big opportunity for us to improve in there. But I think the second part of your conversation, which was how do we have these engaged guests that are already experiencing something with us and have them then spend time more broadly with us across the tourism side of the business as well as ski. And the reality is it's something we've really struggled with and have been ongoing. A big part of it is because of just the mental availability of the guest when they are planning to come and what they're thinking about in that journey. Because if you're thinking about going skiing, and if we use your story as an example, like if you haven't been before or you've been once or twice, there's a lot of thought that goes into what do I need to pack and where and what do I need to take up the mountain, how am I going to get up the mountain and all that sort of stuff. And so what we've found in lots of what we've tried previously is it didn't really work that well because people weren't mentally available to be thinking about going on a cruise in Milford. And so how we're looking at that for the future is a little bit different, and it's about understanding when are they. And interestingly with ski, a lot of that comes down to usually day 4 of their trip. If they're coming for 7 days to Queensland, say, day 4 of their trip is when they've actually had 3 great days of skiing, ideally, and then they're starting to feel a little bit tired and might need a rest day.
Yeah.
And so it's making sure that we're showing up in the right places in advance of that. Or the other one is if the mountain's closed or the weather's looking bad for any reason, sometimes that's still the best time to go. But in general, a lot of people will choose those days to not go up the mountain. And so being able to, whether it's target them at that period with the right opportunity for them to see some of our tourism experiences or engage with us is more what it's about. Previously, we were trying a lot of really overt stuff, and we even put a tourism booth up on the mountain to try and have people understand that we were connected and that we had these other activities, but honestly, no one wanted to hear about that when you're up the mountain.
I'm here to ski, not to buy tomorrow. Yeah.
I want to have a great day in the snow. I want to enjoy the time with my family and friends. I want some really nice food. I want a great flat white. I want one of the Cardrona's famous scones. Like, you're not there to go, oh, are we going to Milford tomorrow?
Yeah. And so you talked about post. Is it fair to assume that post-event, the customer peer reviews and advocacy are a really strong driver for next year's visit of friends and other whānau coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. More so in ski than tourism, but important in tourism. And that's largely just because ski is sort of the activity that a lot of people do every year. Whereas tourism, we know that a lot of people will come to New Zealand once or at least once every 20 years. Like, they're not back the next year to necessarily go and see Milford again or Doubtful Sound again or Stewart Island again. And so there's a nuance between those two different sets of customers, I guess, or guests. And what that means is we need to keep that in mind, that some are more likely to be sharing their experience. And it's more of a referral approach as to what we kind of want them to do. And others, it's about driving repetition, but also bring other people with you. What is interesting about our business is we've done a really good job of getting the feedback back to us, so that we can make our experiences better. And this comes back to our culture of trying to deliver these amazing, memorable experiences, whether it's on the mountain or across tourism. But what we haven't done a great job of is lots of those opportunities that you might consider for driving referral and making it easy for people to share, whether that's sharing content or completing reviews or actually just communicating well with their friends what that experience was. And so that's something we'll look to do better and better in the coming years.
I think that word experience is really interesting, because now that I think about what contribution is digital making to this engagement, and it's very much it's a facilitator, an accelerator, it's accessibility, right? But the digital part, do you think there's ever a space there where digital actually becomes experiential and becomes part of the event? In my head, I'm thinking about people wearing Apple Vision Pro goggles down the slopes, and they're getting your live weather updates and things like that.
Yeah.
Have you got wild visions of what 20 years ahead that looks like?
Yeah, I don't know about 20 years, but the role technology can play in making an experience better is phenomenal. And if I think about on mountain, and you'll see lots of operators doing on mountain apps.
Yep.
And they're usually pretty simplistic. They replace maybe an RFID card, so you use that to scan through gates and stuff. They might have some, They might have some static display maps around the mountain. If you're lucky, they might tell you of some of the events that are happening on a regular basis. So they're pretty, uninteractive.
But so they're mostly just content on an app rather than anything deeply entwined into the actions you're making.
Yeah. Mostly. There's some slight exceptions to that, but that's where most, resorts or ski fields have gone today. The opportunity in that space is way more than that. And so if you think about some of the things that are really important on a mountain, and when you're skiing, especially if you haven't been there before, it's like, where do I go to have the best time? And there's some criteria that tells you that. It's like, where do I not have to line up? Where's the snow going to be great? Where does the skiing match my level of ability? And then the last thing you want to do is get your phone out every time you see a fork in the road to decide which way you go. It just ruins that whole experience. But what if, while you were skiing down, your Apple Watch gave you 2 vibrations for going right and 1 for going left? And that took you to the lift that had the shortest line on the mountain so that you could actually get more laps in and have more fun. Or it brought in the safety element of giving people a warning if they're starting to get towards out of bounds, or if something goes wrong, it sends an alert to patrol. Like, there's a whole opportunity to improve the experience with digital tools. No?
I think that's a great insight, because immediately all of us default to thinking about something with a screen in our hand, right? But actually what you're saying is that the next evolution away from the device is the wearable, it's the IoT, it's something which is highly interactive in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's about, I think all of these things, and technology's often hard because it's really easy to see the shiny and try and build the shiny, if you like, because you can. But the reality is, if you come back to that classic, like, what's the problem, or what's the user story, what are we trying to solve, and what would that look like, and what role can technology play in that? Because sometimes it's not about technology at all. It's about using something else to achieve that outcome. And I think if you start there, it involves a lot, right?
Yeah, I'll give you an exact example. My daughter is an avid skier. She comes down to your slopes. The one thing that she messes up every time, and she purchases every time on the ski slope, is another GoPro battery, right? So the most important thing for her Well, I think it's the fact that she loves the skiing, and she genuinely does. But it's the social sharing and the recording of the experience. And those of us with a few more grey hairs, we used to remember the days where we just recorded our own memories. But the generation coming through need to record, share, engage, and impress with those memories as well. So, I expect that there is a lot to come in that space of wearables. I expect it will also come through the apparel, through the boards, through the skis, through the helmets, through. There's got to be a space there where Burton and Atomic and GoPro and RealNZ have one massive collaboration, which defines this incredible experience. And the experience is multi-dimensional, right? It's a digital as well as a physical experience that comes through there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. I love your passion for the industry, the values, the vision, and also, the team love working with you because you're always open to saying, well, maybe we are looking at this through the wrong lens, and we can, maybe turning things on its head is a great way to look at things. So just to leave us with the audience, what's the big vision for RealNZ over the next 2 to 3 years? Who do you want to lead this business to be that it isn't already?
Oh, geez, that's a big question to finish on, Todd.
Got to finish on the biggies, or should we just go for a beer?
Yeah. I think for us, we're coming out of that survival mode and moving into thriving, and we're starting to invest in our future in a really meaningful way.
Love it.
And so if I look at the next 3 years, it's starting to step further towards our potential of what we can be. And we've already signed off and announced some significant investment in Cardrona with the opening of Soho, which will take us to be the biggest ski field in New Zealand, or inbound terrain ski area in New Zealand. And so that's really exciting. But I think it's how we can look at those investments alongside our purpose to actually deliver better against our purpose. And I think amongst that, technology is going to play a massive role for us. And that's what's really exciting for me, is it enables us to do a lot more better with less. So that's our future.
Amazing. Scott, thank you so much for your open sharing, transparency, insights. It's priceless. And to those that are listening, if you're coming to New Zealand, dial up RealNZ, find out the multitude of things that you can do. Maybe try and hit Scott up on LinkedIn for a discount, and he can blame me and send me all the hate mail afterward.
Yeah.
All right, team. Have a fantastic weekend. Go well, Scott. Appreciate your time, my friend.
Awesome.